Johnny Carson is considered one of the maximum iconic TV hosts, able to get at the side of almost absolutely everyone no matter his accommodating character and willingness to be open with others. There are times whilst he changed into angry via his guests, and here are the maximum high-quality visitors that Johnny Carson hated having on his display. Bob Hope, notwithstanding being two of the maximum iconic figures in comedy, Johnny Carson and Bob Hope had an expert courting that was far from warm. Carson acknowledged for his easy interviewing competencies and capacity to create spontaneous, enticing conversations. Reportedly disliked having Bob Hope on The Tonight Show. The cause Hope's rigid, pre-scripted style clashed with Carson's choice for organic, unfastened, flowing discussions, making for some of the maximum compelled interviews in Tonight Show history. Bob Hope changed into a legendary comic, however. By the point he became a common guest on The Tonight Show, he became an growing old performer who relied closely on prepared jokes and cue cards. Unlike maximum visitors who engaged in herbal banter with Carson, Desire preferred to deliver rehearsed on-liner frequently. Awaiting Carson to set him up for punchlines, this made for interviews that felt less like conversations and more like a scripted comedy routine. Something Carson reportedly observed tedious and uninspiring. Another predominant issue became that Hope became not in particular, attractive conversationalist. Carson thrived on spontaneity, but with Desire. The interviews have been formulaic and predictable. Hope's group would frequently send Tonight Show producers a listing of topics and pre-written jokes earlier, basically turning Carson right into a prop in preference to an interviewer. This lack of authentic interplay annoyed Carson, who once described interviewing Hope as comparable to talking to a giant promotional system. On top of that, Hope's reputation as Hollywood royalty intended that The Tonight Show frequently felt obligated to e-book him, whether or not he had whatever new or interesting to sell, not like other visitors who came to entertain or percentage personal stories. Hope's appearances were often tied to something new, unique, or assignment he became running on making them sense like glorified classified ads. Joan Rivers, Johnny Carson. And Joan Rivers had a complicated courting that advanced from friendship and mentorship to deep resentment early in her career. Rivers turned into one among Carson's preferred visitors on The Tonight Show. He sought after a short wit, ambitious humor, and capacity to interact in sharp banter, frequently inviting her at the display as a visitor host, but their expert relationship took a dramatic turn in 1986. Leading Carson to dislike and, in the end, ban Rivers from his display completely. Carson, to start with, championed Rivers, giving her one in every of her first primary breaks on national television in 965 she fast, have become a ordinary or even served as Carson's common guest host within the early 980s. This led many to accept as true, with she being groomed as his successor, but no matter their on-air chemistry, Carson reportedly discovered Rivers tough to control. At instance, she turned into respected for rapid gratification and rapid humor, which occasionally clashed with Carson's greater controlled, clean fashion of website hosting. The real cause Carson got here to dislike having Rivers on his display wasn't about her humor, however. Alternatively, a deep non-public betrayal, at least in his eyes, in 986 Rivers. Ordinary a suggestion to host The Late Show starring Joan Rivers on Fox, making her the primary woman to have her personal overdue night speak display. However, she did no longer inform Carson personally. Earlier than the deal turned into announced, Carson felt blindsided and deeply betrayed, seeing her move as an act of disloyalty, whilst Rivers attempted to call him to provide an explanation, for he refused to take her calls and by no means spoke to her once more. Following this fallout, Carson banned Rivers from The Tonight Show, a selection that remained in impact for nearly 30 years. Even after Carson retired, his successor Jay Leno upheld the ban out of admire for Carson. Rivers did no longer return to The Tonight Show till 2014, while Jimmy Fallon took over Wayne Newton, Johnny Carson, and Wayne Newton had one of the most notorious feuds in overdue night television records, while Carson turned into recognized for his sharp wit and light-hearted jabs at celebrities. His repeated jokes about Newton brought about critical anxiety, finally culminating in a non-public confrontation that made Carson deeply uncomfortable. Carson often made a laugh of Newton on The Tonight Show, regularly focused on the singer, flamboyant fashion, over-the-top performances, and perceived lack of masculinity. Carson's jokes often hinted at Newton's excessive voice, polished look, and Vegas showmanship, subtly implying that he wasn't as tough or manly as different entertainers. Whilst many celebrities laughed off Carson's barbs, Newton took them. In my opinion, he turned into proud of his fulfillment and did no longer appreciate being the difficulty of ongoing ridicule. The tension reached a breaking point. While Newton determined to confront Carson without delay, Newton, who had a strong popularity for being nicely connected in Las Vegas, didn't simply brush aside Carson's feedback. He reportedly stormed into Carson's workplace and bodily intimidated him, cautioned him to forsta. Pissed off Carson, who valued visitors that allowed for a collaborative and engaging trade. Moreover, Mailer's debatable reputation preceded him. Regarded for his outspoken perspectives on politics, culture, and gender, Mailer often delved into polarizing subjects that could alienate audiences or create awkward moments. Carson, who carefully curated his show to enchantment to a huge target audience, possibly discovered Mailer's unpredictability and often abrasive demeanor to be a liability. Eventually, Carson's reserved character contrasted sharply with Mailer's ego and highbrow bravado, even as Carson could manage tough visitors with humor. Mauer's intensity and unwillingness to play together with the display's lighter tone, in all likelihood, made him a frustrating presence in the end. Norman Mailer's combative nature, dominating presence, and controversial tendencies clashed with Johnny Carson's vision for The Tonight Show, making him one of the host's least preferred visitors. Tony Curtis, whilst Curtis turned into undeniably a main star and a captivating character, his conduct and technique throughout interviews often clashed with Carson's style. Make his appearances a supply of anxiety for the host, one of the essential motives. Carson reportedly disliked having Tony Curtis at the display was the actor's tendency to dominate conversations. Curtis, regarded for his energy and self-confidence, regularly took over interviews, launching into lengthy-winded stories about his profession, non-public existence, or Hollywood anecdotes. Even as those memories may be interesting, they often left little room for Carson to manual the verbal exchange or inject his signature humor. Carson, who thrived on a balanced interplay with his guests, observed Curtis's monopolization of the highlight, frustrating Curtis's oversized character and flair for self-promoting, also clashed with Carson's extra understated and witty demeanor. Curtis regularly came across as overly keen to remind audiences of his stardom and accomplishments, which can disrupt the natural drift of the display. Carson, who favored guests that have been self-aware and willing to poke amusing at themselves, may also have determined Curtis' larger-than-life persona to be grating every other factor, turned into Curtis's unpredictability, recognized for his attraction and edge. The theatricality. Curtis regularly veered off subject matter or tried to upstage Carson with his humor or antics. At the same time as Carson became skilled at coping with difficult visitors, Curtis's tendency to draw interest to himself ought to throw off the rhythm of the display, creating moments that felt chaotic instead of unique. Ultimately, Curtis's demeanor may have truly rubbed Carson the incorrect manner. Carson, who valued professionalism and subtlety, possibly determined Curtis's brashness and over-the-pickle conduct to be a negative fit for the magazine he worked to cultivate at The Tonight Show. Don Rickles, the iconic insult comic and common visitor on the show, was each a supply of high-quality comedy and coffee, frustration for Carson, whilst Rickles changed into, undoubtedly, a comedy legend. And crowd preferred his unpredictable and chaotic electricity from time to time, made him a thorn in Carson's aspect at some point of his appearances. One of the number one reasons Rickles will be a challenging guest for Carson became his tendency to take over the display. Rickles, his comedy style, become fast fireplace, relentless and targeted on insulting anyone in the room, such as Carson himself, even as Carson often performed alongside or even enjoyed being the butt of Rickles' his jokes. There have been instances whilst Rickles' antics disrupted the float of the show, Carson, who valued stability and manipulated in his interviews, probably located Rickles' unpredictability to be each a blessing and a headache. Rickles' his loss of boundaries also examined Carson's staying power. Recognized for breaking the fourth wall and ignoring the standard decorum of communicate show appearances, Rickles would regularly rise up from his seat, interact with the target audience, or riff on members of the production crew on one well-known event. Rickles even broke Carson's cigarette box on his table whilst visitor Webb hosting the show. prompting Carson to hurricane onto the set of CPO Sharky Rickles as sitcom to confront him in a hilarious, however, visibly irritated second, even as audiences loved these chaotic interactions, who preferred structured comedy over total mayhem. Any other supply of hysteria was Riel's relentless teasing of Carson, at the same time as Carson was recognized for his sharp wit and potential to spar with guests. Rick's humor often went similarly than most. He would roast Carson in approaches that occasionally regarded to go past playful banter, forcing Carson to work hard to keep his composure whilst keeping the target market entertained, while Carson changed into a very good sport. Rickles, his jabs may have occasionally hit a nerve, particularly after they touched on Carson's private lifestyles or insecurities. No matter the occasional tension, Carson and Rickles had a mutual recognize and a completely unique comedic chemistry. Rickles' chaotic presence, while challenging off, led to a number of the most memorable and hilarious moments on The Tonight Show. But it's clean that Rickles' unpredictability, boundary-pushing humor, and tendency to overshadow Carson made him a guest who should simultaneously satisfaction and frustrate the mythical host.